I don't think there's anyone that has as much trouble with this microphone as me. I don't know why that is, but every time.
If you don't look around, you can just stay there.
Okay. All right, we'll try it. Can you hear me? Okay, that was not a good response. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's okay. Well, great. We'll work with that. Well, tonight we are doing something. I don't know if y'all do this ever, but we've kind of taken to doing it. And by we, I mean me, because I'm deciding what we preach on. So every so often we'll do a song study. And the point of it is to take a deeper look at what it is that we sing. And tonight we're going to take a look at this song in particular. So When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, if you want to open your book to it, it's page 315. And you'll probably be benefited by having that open. So again, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. Might be able to get all this to stay up here. Okay. So this song in particular is, whether or not we recognize it, one of the best beloved songs in our hymn book. And maybe it's not personally one of yours. I'm particularly fond of it, but this song is representative of the author, and we're going to talk some about him. But it is a song that is renowned for being a little bit deeper maybe than other songs that we sing, and we'll talk about it as we go along. But the problem with this whole idea of studying a song is that it's kind of like trying to describe a joke that somebody didn't get. So there's a famous phrase by E.B. White, who's the author of Charlotte's Web, who says that you can dissect a joke much in the same way that you can dissect a frog. The problem is the joke, just like the frog, ends up dead. And so when we look at this song, I hope not to kill the song, but at the same time, if we don't dissect what it is that we're singing, then our words are pointless. So we're going to take a look at this song, and we're going to look a little bit at the background, and we're going to look at the lyrics of the song, and then eventually look at some of the ways that that applies to us. So we're going to start out again with some of the background. And the background starts with the year that the song was published, which is 1707. So this is pretty far back in American history, actually kind of pre-American history, colonial era. This is, of course, before the Revolution. It's before the French and Indian War. This is pretty early on. And the year of 1707 is the most important global event, I suppose, that's happening is the formation of Great Britain. So before you have separate states of England and Scotland and Wales, at this point, they actually come together and form Great Britain. So that just kind of sets the stage for where we're at in history, a very long time ago. And then we have to talk about our author. So if you look in the book, if you're looking at the 315th hymn in the book, at the bottom of the page, you're going to see words, Isaac Watts, 1707. So that's what we're talking about right now. So again, underneath the music, it says the words are written by Isaac Watts. Well, Isaac Watts is born in England in about 1674, and he is born into a dissenting Anglican family. So he's Anglican, but only kind of. He's a little more Protestant than most Anglicans, and he actually will grow up to be a pastor in an Anglican church. So again, dissenting Anglicans, you don't have priests, you have pastors. It's one of the major differences we see. So when we're talking about this, though, he is not best known as a preacher. Instead, he is best known as a hymn writer, and he writes some 600 hymns, and only a few of those are in our particular hymn book. But you know some of them. So he also writes, beyond just this song, he writes, We're Marching to Zion. You probably heard that, sang that once or twice. He also writes, Alas, and did my Savior bleed? He also writes, Joy to the World. So he writes some songs that we are familiar with, and this one just as well. So he is, and this is not to sing the praises of any individual person, but he is considered to be almost the father of modern hymn writing. Now, why is that? Well, because he helps to transition from the older style of what was happening in church music to more of what we see today. So up to this point, up to the 1700s, a lot of church music is going to be kind of boring, and that sounds bad, but a lot of times it's going to be a psalm from the Old Testament that you've put to some kind of music that's probably not the most exciting or the most interesting, and then you kind of sing along to it or even hum along to it. Well, at this point, with Isaac Watts, he's going to transition out of that sort of boring way of making music for the church, and he's going to add more interesting melodies for one, or at least at this time that'll happen. And then he's going to use some more theologically rich lyrics alongside those melodies. And so he transitions from the older, the kind of boring, to the more modern that we still have today. We still appreciate him for making that transition, because otherwise today our songs wouldn't be like they are. So he is the author of the words of this song, but then under his name in the book, it says music. And music, for the music, it says Gregorian chant, and then it says arrangement Lowell Mason. So you've got two different things going on here. The first part of it is the Gregorian chant. Well, why does it say that? Well, this song was originally written, or the music was arranged for it, without the harmonies that we sing today. And if you're familiar with time when you're in the car, hum this song, and hum it very slow. And again, if you're familiar with Gregorian chants, you'll say, oh yeah, that's exactly what this is. Now, that doesn't mean it goes all the way back to the period when those were popular. Instead, it means that it was arranged to sound like that. So it's kind of after that style. And the other thing I'll mention about our composer, Mr. Mason here, is that he is the composer of this song, which is a very high-class, sophisticated, musically speaking song. And then he wrote another high-class, sophisticated, musically speaking song in Mary Had a Little Lamb. So he's the composer both of this hymn and composer of Mary Had a Little Lamb. Kind of interesting how history intersects when you look back, especially in this music history. Sometimes when you look back into a particular song, there's some kind of story or some kind of event that inspires the whole thing. And it's an impressive and important event in someone's life, and then sometimes there's not. And this is one of those cases. There's nothing in particular that happens to Watts that makes him write this song. Instead, he writes it as one of the many, many other hymns that he does. That doesn't mean it's not important in his life or important to us, but something particularly interesting, aside maybe from the fact that he did not initially want to publish his hymns, but was encouraged to do so later on. He went for years without publishing them publicly anyway. So let's take a look now at some of the lyrics of the song. So again, we'll be turning to the book here. Isaac Watts, as I said, is kind of renowned among hymn writers. Why is that? Well, we'll talk about some different things that he does, but we'll start by saying that he has a way in his songs of capturing his point right from the beginning. So when you look at this song, all you have to read is "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross," and you already know what the song is about. And the same thing is true with "Joy of the World" or "Alas, and Did My Savior Bleed." You know the song just from the opening line, because he has a way of doing that. The whole concept is there in the first words. The other thing we'll mention before getting into more of the words is to say survey, the word, the third word in the song, is not a word that we use outside of certain specific contexts all that often. You might survey some land that you're going to build on or something like that, or you might have a survey of a certain period of history, or you might say that a survey, there's a lot of examples we go with, but survey in general kind of has that meaning here as well. But it means a look, and more of a broad look than a specific look at one thing, in this case being the wondrous cross. So it's not the point of the song just to look at the cross itself and say, oh wow, look at that cross, but instead he's going to paint the whole picture of what's happening on that cross. And so he's going to survey the cross and the events happening on that cross. So in the first verse, he starts with the words we've already said, "When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died." So initially, he is setting the scene. He's unfolding the situation here. When I view the cross, what happens then? What is my response? And ultimately, that's our question for this song as well. When I look at the cross, not just when Isaac Watts looks at the cross, but when Isaac Hall looks at the cross, what happens to him? Well, when originally writing this, he says, when I survey the wondrous cross, this is what takes place. My richest gains I count but loss, and pour content on all my pride. So a second way in which we can kind of highlight Watts' ability to phrase things in a poetic way, but also a way that we can understand, is to look at these last two phrases where you have two contrasts being made, two paradoxes being pointed out. So you see that my richest gain I count but loss. Okay, you have gain and loss being mirrored against each other there. And then you have the same thing with contempt or disdain and pride. So you have another contrast that's being made there. He does this very well. And if I were to write a hymn, it might be okay, but it's not going to contain any good literary devices like we have in this hymn. But the whole point here is in the first verse is to set the scene and to say right off the bat how I'm going to respond to this. This humbles me as I look at this scene. Second verse. Second verse is very familiar to us if you paid attention to the reading that was done just a minute ago. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 14, Paul writes, "But God forbid that I should boast except in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom the world has been crucified." It says, "Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my Lord." Well, that is a direct draw for Watts here from Paul. He says, you know what? Paul already said it good enough. I'm going to take his words and I'm going to put them in the song. He's going to do that, and then he's going to respond to those words. So second half of the verse, he says, "If my boast is in Christ, then all the vain things that charm me most, I'll sacrifice those to his blood." Well, what are the vain things that charm me most? Well, they are the things of this world. They're the things that I look around and I say, you know what? I kind of like that. I enjoy that. And Watts says, what is that compared to the sacrifice that Christ has already made? So Watts is already humbled himself in the first verse and recognizes the need for his own sacrifice in response to the sacrifice of Christ. First two verses. The third verse kind of sets the scene again here. So first verse sets our situation out being on the cross, but the third verse is going to do a little bit more of the same. From his head, from his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Now, another highly poetic statement there. Why do I say it's highly poetic? Because it's not literal in the slightest. But do you think any of the eyewitnesses that were there at the cross saw sorrow and love flowing down Jesus' body? Not in a literal sense. What was flowing down his body? Blood mixed with water after he was stabbed in the side, and sweat. Well, none of those things are love and sorrow, and yet they are. So those two things are mingled together in this event. And then he asks the important question, did such love and sorrow meet? Now, in our own lives, sometimes we have sorrow, sometimes we have love, and sometimes those do overlap. Sometimes a loved one is dying, and maybe you get a little bit of both in that. But has there ever been, at any point in history, this is his question, has there ever been a time when such sorrow and such love came together? And the answer is never. Never once has that happened. So we ask this first question, and this is a paradox of sorts yet again. And what is he going to do? He's going to follow it with another paradox of sorts. That's kind of the structure that he's had here. So the second question is, has a thorn or have thorns ever composed so rich a crown? The thorns that Jesus had placed on his head were how valuable in terms of worldly financial goods? They were worthless. I assume they found the closest tree that had thorns on it, twisted something together, and put it on his head. Is that valuable? No. And yet the question still strikes us, when have thorns composed so rich a crown? Now I think about in Revelation, whenever you see the 24 elders coming before the throne, and then they see the lamb that is as if it was slain. And what do they do when the lamb enters? What do they do with their crowns? They throw them at the feet of Jesus. Why? Because those crowns are not valuable. Even in worldly terms, if you think about the greatest sets of crowns ever made, and you think about the British monarchy or Germany or Russia, and you say, well, those are some pretty impressive crowns. They've got a lot of gold, they've got a lot of precious gemstones, and how valuable are they compared to this one that's made out of thorns? Well, they're worthless. So the questions are obvious enough to be answered, but rhetorical enough that they don't have to be answered. But that's the third verse. Now, the fourth verse, I find this interesting. I didn't realize on the paperless hymnal that it skips from verse 3 to 5. Did you notice that? Did anyone notice that? Unless you were looking for it, you might not have, but it skips from the third verse to the fifth verse. Why? Because we didn't sing the fourth verse. Because we don't know the fourth verse. Because we've never sung the fourth verse. I've never sung it anywhere that I've been. But there is a fourth verse to this song that is original to the song. Why it is not in our book, I don't know. I really can't tell you. But I'll read it for you because the words are worth hearing and maybe worth singing sometime. The fourth verse of the song says, "His dying crimson like a robe, his body on the tree. Then I am dead to all the globe, and all the globe is dead to me." Well, where have I heard that little phrase at the end there? We'll go back to Galatians chapter 6, the second half of verse 14. Paul says there, the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. So it turns out that Watts actually didn't just include the first half of the verse, he included both halves. We just don't know the verse for one reason or another. So we are benefited at least by knowing that there is a fourth verse, and this happens some of the time whenever I've done these studies, that there are other verses that we just don't sing, but this one is interesting and worth hearing. I'll also point out, just because I find it interesting, the phrase that we kind of highlighted from this and the way that Paul uses it forms something called a chiasmus. Okay, well, that's kind of a weird word. What does it mean? Well, it's a literary device that's actually somewhat common in the New Testament, and it is based on the idea of the Greek letter chi, or we would normally say chi. And the letter chi or chi is an X shape. And so it kind of mirrors itself, either way that you look at it. Well, in this literary form, a chiasmus then is something that mirrors itself. And that's exactly what this phrase does. That by whom the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. And there are examples of this that are far longer than just one phrase in the New Testament, but we're just highlighting here for interest. But let me read that fourth verse one more time, just to get in our head. His dying crimson, like a robe, spreads o'er his body on the tree. And then I am dead to all the globe, and all the globe is dead to me. The fifth verse, or the fourth verse in the book, says, "Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were at present far too small." That line humbles me more than most lines that we sing of any song. Why? Because Watts says, if I possessed everything, if all of creation were mine to give, and I could present that to Christ, would that pay off what I owe him? Not at all. Even if I possessed the entire world, it wouldn't be enough. That sacrifice is beyond anything that we can repay. And that sets up the second half of the verse. And the second half of the verse is the climax of the song. Something else that Watts does very well in his songs is that he leads us up the entire time to one final point. And so what is the final point? What is the conclusion? At the beginning of the song, we say, when I survey the wondrous cross on which Jesus died, then something's going to happen. What's going to happen? Well, the end result, Watts says, here's my conclusion. When I survey the wondrous cross, when I see the love so amazing, so divine, it demands my soul, my life, and my all. There is no other appropriate response to the love of Christ or to seeing the cross. That's Watts' point in this song. Let me give you a high to Mr. Hopkins, so that's good. But Lily at Maple Avenue was baptized about 2 weeks ago, and her father brought her out into the lobby before services to talk to me about it. And I always like to ask, well, why is it that you want to do that? Of course, it's a great thing, but why do you want to be baptized? Well, what was her answer? Well, she said, because I want to live for Jesus. All right. Well, that's a great reason to be baptized. And so when we look at this, we say, well, what should our response be to the love of Christ? Well, I want to live for him. It's as simple as that, but of course, Watts puts it in a much more beautiful way. So what can we take away from this song then? What applications can we make? Let's start with this. How important is it to sing? It's kind of important, right? The best example I know of to illustrate the point of singing's importance is to point to Jesus. The guy that's going to betray him has just left the dinner table. I'm going to be betrayed, and sometimes that I'm going to be put on a cross to be crucified. And what does he do? It says, after they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. The two most important things that Jesus could think to do when all this was happening was to sing and then to pray. How important is singing? Well, apparently to Jesus, it's pretty important. Second thing that we can say is to focus on the words. Well, why does that matter? Well, let me make a suggestion to you. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, first couple verses, where Paul says that if I could speak the tongues of men and of angels, but I have not love, I become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal, right? Okay. Well, if I sing the words of this song, and I do so without understanding the words, and I do so without passion, and I do so without love, then what am I doing? Well, I'm now a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Well, what is a sounding brass and clanging cymbal? Maybe this is an overstep of this verse, but isn't that an instrument? Isn't that just instrumental music? If the love's not there, if the passion isn't there, then what is praising God? Well, it's just my voice, but the heart has to be in it. So if the heart's not there, it's not worth singing. And that's true even in a cappella music, that we could be guilty of a form of instrumental music just because our heart is not there. Third thing we can point out, or a question that we can ask, is whenever we look 315 years down the line, that's how long ago this song is written, when we look that far into the future, what are we going to have done that somebody looks back at and says, you know what, I can appreciate that this person did this? And I don't know if that's really available to us. I don't know how many of us will have a lasting impact of 315 years, but maybe a better question, what about 5 years from now? What is somebody going to look back to you and say, boy, I'm glad they did that. Boy, I'm thankful that they did that. Now, maybe I don't write a hymn that changes people's hearts, but maybe I have conversations that do. And maybe a few years down the line, somebody looks to me and says, well, I'm glad he talked to me about that, because there is great benefit in what he told me. Maybe I'm saved now as a result, but certainly we can change people's hearts, even if it's not quite in the same way. So, third question. If the whole point of this song is to talk about the love of Christ, and we say when we look at the cross, we can see that love, well, then what is our response to it? Well, our response should be to love God. And I know it's very easy to say, well, I do love God, and that's good. But let me give you this simple analogy, this simple illustration. If you say, you know what, I really love this girl. I think I'm in love with this girl. Okay, great. You going to marry her sometime? No. Okay, well, that's kind of strange. But I really love her. Okay, that's good. That's good. What do you do for her? What do you mean? I don't do anything for her, but I love her. Okay, great. Do you ever tell her that you love her? Well, no, but I do love her. Okay, great. Is that love? Not really. But what does our love for Christ look like? What does it compel us to do? If our love for Christ says, well, I love him, but I'm not married to him, and I don't do anything for him, and I don't tell him or anybody else how much I love him, well, that's probably not great love. And it's not love that is deserving of the sacrifice that's been made for us. So the question is, though, if if we don't love Christ to the extent that we actually do something for him, well, then what is the alternative? If what we do is not based on love, then what is the alternative? In our text in Galatians chapter 6, I want to look at verses 11 and following. Paul says, starting Galatians 6, verse 11, "See what large letters I have written to you with my own hand. As many as desire to make a good showing in the flesh, these would compel you to be circumcised, only that they may not suffer persecution for the cross of Christ. For not even those who are circumcised keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised, that they may boast in your flesh." The two phrases I want to point out are make a good showing in the flesh, and boast in the flesh. So again, if our actions, if our coming to church is not motivated, as an example, if our coming to church is not motivated by love for Christ, then what is the motivation? Well, according to Paul, the motivation is to boast in the flesh. How would that be? Well, if I'm coming here not because I love Christ, then I'm doing it probably either so other people think that I look better than I really do, or so that I'm not disappointing people that expect me to be there. Are those good enough reasons to be here? No, not really. Instead, the love of Christ does what? Well, we've already seen it in the last verse of the song. It demands my soul, my life, and my all. It demands my sacrifice, my willingness to do absolutely anything for Christ, because he did absolutely anything for me. The question this evening, and this is the invitation being extended, the question is, when you survey the wondrous cross, when you stop for a few minutes, you take a few deep breaths, and you look at your own life, and then you look to the cross, and you see the love that was shown there. When you survey the wondrous cross, how do you respond? Now, hopefully you've responded a long time ago with a commitment to Christ, and hopefully you've kept up that commitment, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe you've not shown that love back to Christ that was shown to you. Or maybe you have at some point, but maybe Christ has part of your life, maybe a little bit of your soul, if that's even possible, and not quite your all. Well, that's not going to be good enough either. And tonight, if you have a need from this church, this is a great time to address that. But also, if you have something that you can do for this church and you want to step up and do that, that's great too. If there's anything that we can do for you, anything that you can do for the church, come forward now as we stand, as we sing.
There's a stranger at the door, and he has